For many, what seems like ghostly images of the Cold War have returned. Russia is currently seeking to build military bases in both Vietnam and Cuba. Russia is obviously seeking a greater global influence as world politics and economics is changing with the decline of the American empire. We are working on establishing Navy bases outside Russia. We aim to set up resupply bases in Cuba, the Seychelles, and Vietnam. Interesting to note here is that Russia is seeking to build these bases peacefully and with the compliance of the countries, instead of invading them the way the United States has with the Middle East and much of the rest of the world. They are trying to seek common ground and a peaceful way of having them instead of threatening military force against them and, if they still refuse, invading them and mass slaughtering people. Now, the reason for this is that Russia is going for a defense of the only Navy refueling point they have, which is Syria. And of course, in that situation, that Navy refueling point is currently under threat by U.S. and NATO imperialism against the country through the use of the terrorists that are being passed off as rebels. Now, obviously, this is also a reaction by Russia reacting to the missile shield that was placed in Europe with missiles aimed at them, despite the fact the United States has claimed that that's not what they're there for, when anybody can see that that's clearly why they are there. Now, the Vietnamese president, Trong Tan Sam, said he is ready to allow Russia to set up some kind of servicing section in Cam Ranh Bay. Now, Russia is, of course, seeking to forward their own interests in the face of the declining U.S. world superpower. However, I actually oppose the building of these bases. Now, not for the reasons that a lot of people might think. I think that these bases tend to violate the national sovereignty of the individual countries. And of course, that really only exists if the population of the country that the, in this case, refueling station or military base exists in, doesn't want it there. That would be tremendously up to whether or not the population of those countries actually wanted those bases there available. And that's always a hard thing to be able to tell, because frequently these things are always done without the consent of the population, as I previously stated with the United States and England and their histories of doing all of that. So I think in this case it would be very difficult to determine whether or not the populations of Vietnam or Cuba actually wanted to allow those military bases actually there. And I think U.S. condemnation of a Russian base inside of Cuba, even if it is just a fuel supply depot, doesn't really mean much compared to the illegal detention and torture facility that actually exists in Guantanamo Bay. So it's a kind of a hypocritical stance to take. However, what's really interesting, and is probably the most important part of this entire situation, is that this is Russia's biggest military overhaul since the end of the Soviet era.